Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a text that is, well, over 1,600 years old, but honestly, it feels like it could have been written yesterday. We are diving into Saint Augustine's Confessions. And look, this isn't just some dusty history lesson. It's a profound, incredibly raw look right into the mirror of the human condition. I want to ask you a really direct question right off the bat. Have you ever felt hollow? Like, no matter how much success you rack up, or how many friends you have around you, or how many different pleasures you chase down, there's just this quiet, persistent emptiness inside that literally will not go away. If you've ever felt that kind of quiet emptiness, that sort of modern burnout of superficial success, you are actually sharing an experience with a guy who climbed to the absolute peak of the Roman Empire, only to realize he was completely hollow inside.
His name was Aurelius Augustinus, though we all know him today as Saint Augustine. Now, do me a favor and just completely erase that image of a dry, boring theologian from your mind. Seriously, scratch that. Instead, I want you to think of Augustine as history's very first psychological detective. He isn't out to solve a crime, he's out to solve the ultimate mystery, himself.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this one specific quote. Listen to this. "I have become a question to myself." It perfectly frames his entire autobiography. This is not some self-congratulatory pat-on-the-back memoir. It is a raw, deeply personal investigation of the soul. He's looking inward, picking apart his own flaws, his own desires, and just trying to figure out why on earth he does the things he does. And that kind of brings us to his youth, a time pretty much entirely defined by chasing empty pleasures. Now, Augustine possessed immense, undeniable talent. The guy was brilliant, but that brilliance was plagued by deep inner turmoil. He absolutely hated the brutal education system of his day. Ironically, it punished children for playing, but completely praised adults for their obsession with the quote-unquote grown-up games of business and fame. He was being trained to win court cases and make a ton of money, but no one was teaching him how to care for his own soul.
To really wrap our heads around his story, let's just briefly orient ourselves to his physical journey, his geographical and professional ascent straight up the ladder of the Roman Empire. He starts in 354 AD, down in a small North African town called Tagaste. From there, his massive ambition takes him to the glittering metropolis of Carthage, then all the way across the sea to Rome, and finally to Milan, which was the northern capital of the Western Roman Empire. He reaches the absolute peak of his career. But the real story here, it isn't this map of geographical promotions. It's the intense, crazy internal journey happening behind the scenes.
Okay, picture this. When Augustine was a teenager, he and some friends went out and stole a massive amount of pears from a neighbor's tree. Now, they weren't hungry, they didn't need the money. They literally just threw the pears to the pigs. And this brilliantly illustrates the completely irrational logic of sin. Augustine analyzes this like a modern-day psychologist. He realizes he desired evil purely for the sake of it. He just loved the thrill of breaking the law, all fueled by the peer pressure of his buddies shouting, "Let's go!" It exposed a really terrifying truth. Human beings have this dark tendency to want to play God, setting our own rules even when it completely destroys us.
And man, this dark tendency just exploded when he moved to the big city. He writes, "To Carthage I came, where there sang all around me in my ears a cauldron of unholy loves." He totally plunged into the chaotic, lustful metropolis. He took a mistress, he lived for the theater, the whole shebang. But it was also here that he experienced a devastating loss, the sudden death of his best friend. The grief absolutely shattered him. It taught him the agonizing lesson of anchoring your love to mortal things. If you love things that are passing away as if they're going to last forever, your heart is just going to be constantly torn apart.
So Augustine realizes he desperately needs to anchor his heart to something eternal, right? But he has absolutely no idea how. And this brings us to a breaking point, the garden crisis. Right at the peak of his career, Augustine comes face to face with his absolute moral paralysis in Milan. Let's actually break down the massive intellectual breakthrough he had leading up to this. For 9 whole years, Augustine was part of a cult called Manichaeism. They basically taught that evil was this literal, physical dark force fighting against the light. Honestly, it was a great excuse for his sins. He could just blame his physical body. But then he discovers Neoplatonism, and suddenly it clicks. He realizes that evil isn't a physical substance at all. Think about it. Just like darkness is simply the absence of light, evil is merely a privation or an absence of the good. Evil is just what happens when a human will turns away from God toward a lesser good.
But look, knowing the truth intellectually and actually living it out, yeah, those are two completely different things. You can literally feel the heavy psychological pressure of his divided mind when he prays, "Lord, make me chaste, but not yet." He was intellectually convinced of Christianity by Bishop Ambrose in Milan, but he was completely morally powerless to change his own life. He was chained by his own habits, caught in this terrifying, exhausting battle of two wills, raging right inside his own head.
This immense pressure finally leads to a complete nervous breakdown in the garden of his house. He's weeping under a fig tree, totally unable to free himself. And then, a cinematic climax. From over the garden wall, he hears a child's voice chanting this little game in Latin. Tolle lege, take up and read. Interpreting this as a divine command, he opens the letters of the Apostle Paul. He reads a single passage commanding him to put away his lusts and put on Jesus Christ. And instantly the shadows of doubt just vanish. His heart is flooded with absolute peace. The internal war is finally over.
So Augustine is completely transformed, and in the later books of the Confessions, he shifts gears and starts asking some of the deepest philosophical questions in human history. He's exploring the vibrant new landscape of his transformed mind. Let's dig into two of those concepts right now, memory and time.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Augustine visualizes human memory as this vast, multi-chambered palace. It's wild. It doesn't just store physical sensations. It holds abstract concepts, mathematical equations, intense emotions. But the most bizarre and brilliant paradox he points out, this palace even stores the act of forgetting. Like, how do you remember that you forgot something? He marvels at the limitless depth of the human mind, realizing that to even search for God, God must already be illuminating this vast palace from the inside out.
And then he tackles time. Skeptics were always trying to trap him, asking, well, what was God doing before creation? Augustine's answer? God is outside of time entirely. He actually created time. But what actually is time? Augustine defines it as a distension, basically a stretching out of the mind. Think about it. The past only exists as memory in our minds right now. The present is our current attention, and the future is just our expectation. This mind-bending, highly subjective theory of time completely revolutionized philosophy and literally predicted modern psychology centuries early. No big deal, right?
Having charted the inner workings of his own mind, Augustine finally turns his eyes outward, out to the cosmos, looking at the creation story in the book of Genesis. He traces the whole journey, from his own turbulent creation to the ultimate rest of the entire universe. When he looks at the creation story, Augustine highlights something absolutely crucial for us today. He argues that the simple words of Genesis actually hide deep, multiple layers of truth. He insists that as long as an interpretation promotes love for God and your neighbor, we really shouldn't be fighting over who is perfectly right. This humble, open-ended approach prevents religious fanaticism and actively encourages healthy, robust intellectual dialogue. It is such a breath of fresh air, even now. He wraps up this analysis of creation by zeroing in on the seventh day. In Genesis, the seventh day of rest doesn't end with the usual phrase, "and there was evening." It's an eternal Sabbath rest. Augustine beautifully connects the end of the creation story right back to his own life. After a long, incredibly painful, anxiety-ridden journey, he had finally arrived at that quiet, eternal peace. Which, honestly, brings this whole ancient text directly to your doorstep. I want to turn the focus right onto you for a second. Using Augustine's life as a mirror, take a look at your own. In our fast-paced, super noisy modern world that is constantly pushing us to seek the next distraction, what are you chasing? What are you running away from? And most importantly, where are you looking for rest? I'm going to leave you with this iconic thought from the very first chapter of his Confessions. Our heart is restless until it rests in you. It is the absolute ultimate summary of the human condition. So if you were to quiet the noise of your life today, what would your restless heart actually be asking for?
Please like and subscribe.